America's largest river has dropped to 28% of its normal flow at Memphis, and the port that moves 60% of every grain export this country produces has just halted operations. The Memphis gauge is reading minus 10.8 feet, within inches of the all-time record low set in October 2023. The number 4 inland port in the United States is no longer loading barges to capacity. The United States Army Corps of Engineers is dredging the same shoals it dredged in 2022, in 2023, and in 2024. 12 states across the Mississippi Basin are now under federal drought designation. The 2023 low water cost the American economy roughly $20 billion. Shippers paid a $200 per ton premium on grain that year just to move it. A saltwater wedge from the Gulf is already creeping past Plaquemines Parish toward New Orleans drinking water. And the 2026 Super El Niño, the one that was supposed to bring the rain back, has arrived in the wrong half of the basin. But here is the detail that tells the real story. The Army Corps did not plan for a 4th consecutive historic low. The dredges have been emergency deployed to the same 8 river bends every autumn since 2022. The federal hydrologists who set the Mississippi forecast no longer call this a drought. They call it a new baseline. This is what no one told you about the river that built America. The story does not start in 2026. It starts in 1988, when the worst single-year drought in modern memory grounded barges from St. Louis to Memphis and pushed agricultural losses past $10 billion. For more than 2 decades, that summer was the reference point. Then came 2012, when the river dropped so far at Thebes, Illinois, that the Army Corps brought in explosives and dynamited bedrock outcrops out of the channel to keep barges moving. Then came October 2022. The Memphis gauge dropped to minus 11.04 feet and set a new all-time record. In October 2023, the gauge broke its own record at minus 12.04 feet. The saltwater wedge from the Gulf reached Belchasse. Plaquemines Parish was put on bottled water. The Corps built an underwater sill near the river mouth to hold the wedge back. Then 2024 brought a 3rd consecutive historic low. Shippers paid $200 per ton in premiums on grain that previously moved for $30. And now, in May 2026, the spring gauge is already running deep negative, months before the seasonal low normally arrives. Watch what is moving. The river starts as a stream you can step across at Lake Itasca in Minnesota, 2,320 miles from the Gulf. It collects water from 31 states on its way south. The upper Mississippi runs through Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri. At Cairo, Illinois, it meets the Ohio River, which in a normal year carries more water than the Mississippi itself and offsets a dry upper basin. In 2026, the Ohio is also dry. From Cairo south, the river runs through Memphis, Vicksburg, Natchez, Baton Rouge, and finally New Orleans, where the deep draft ocean ships load grain that started its journey on barges 1,500 miles upstream. Past New Orleans, the freshwater plume normally pushes the saltwater of the Gulf back into open water. In 2026, the plume is too weak, and the salt is moving the other way. Here is how it actually works, and it is not the textbook version. The headwaters dry out first. Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa run below normal precipitation for the third winter in 4 years. Snowpack thins. Spring rain fails to recharge the soil. The upper Mississippi flow drops at the source. Less water enters the system at the top. The channel narrows. As discharge falls, the river abandons its banks and retreats to the deepest thread of its own bed. Sandbars that were 6 feet underwater the year before now break the surface. The navigable width of the channel shrinks from 1,000 feet to 200, and in the worst bends, to a single toes beam. The barges ground. A fully loaded grain barge drafts 9 feet of water and needs at least 11 feet under the keel to move. When the Memphis gauge drops below -8, tow captains cut their loads in half, moving 2 barges where they used to move 6. Below -10, they stop loading at all. The grain stays on the dock, and the dock price drops. The mud cones build. Each year, the Army Corps Mississippi Valley Division emergency dredges the same critical bends: Mahone Bend below Memphis, Cat Island below Vicksburg, Lake Providence on the Louisiana border. They cut a channel and they dump the spoil downstream. The next high water redeposits it. The next low water finds it back where it was. The riverbed baseline rises in the same places year after year, even as the surface drops. Then the salt wedge moves up. The Mississippi enters the Gulf at one of the largest river deltas in North America, and the fresh water pushing south is what holds the denser ocean water back. When the freshwater discharge drops, the seawater slides up the riverbed in a wedge, heavier water under lighter water, advancing upstream against the current. In 2023, the wedge reached Bellechasse. In 2026, it is testing the same line in May, 4 months earlier than expected. The intakes for New Orleans drinking water are within range. That is what is starting now. Listen for what comes next. A tow captain in Memphis loads 4 barges instead of 9 and watches the same shoal at Moon Bend rise out of the water for the 4th October in a row. He has been pushing grain on this river for 22 years. He had never seen the bottom of his own channel in his career until 2022. He has seen it every year since. A corn farmer outside Vicksburg watches the elevator dock price for soybeans drop because the barges to move them are not running. The grain he harvested last fall is still in the bin. The grain he plants in the spring will compete with last year's grain for any barge that does move. A water utility manager in Bellechasse runs a chloride test on the river intake. The number this week is higher than last week. He has the protocol for the next number on his desk. Scale up. The Mississippi River system moves roughly 500 million tons of cargo a year in normal years and carries 60% of all United States grain exports. 12 states in the basin are under federal drought designation. The 2023 low water cost the American economy an estimated $20 billion. The 2024 shipping premium of $200 per ton landed on every loaf of bread, every gallon of ethanol, every bag of dog food that traces back to American grain. Scale up again. The United States grain export economy was built on the assumption that the Mississippi is open. Insurance contracts, port investments, foreign supply contracts, and farm-level planting decisions all price that assumption in. 4 consecutive years of historic low water have moved the assumption. The Army Corps Mississippi Valley Division is now running its emergency dredging program as a standing annual rotation. The Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative says the basin economies are no longer recovering between low water years. The damage is compounding, and then the receipt. The Super El Niño that the Pacific has just delivered was supposed to be the reset. Classical El Niño teleconnections wet the lower Mississippi Basin, and the lower basin is getting some of that rain. But the river is fed at the source in the upper Midwest, where the El Niño signal is weakest and the multi-year precipitation deficit is deepest. The rain is falling on the wrong half of the map. So what happens next? No one knows whether the Memphis gauge breaks its own 2023 record this autumn, or holds at -11, or in a way that would require a Pacific signal nobody currently sees, climbs back to seasonal normal. No one knows whether the saltwater wedge reaches the New Orleans intakes in 2026, or holds at Bellechasse for one more year. No one knows whether the Army Corps gets the budget for a permanent sill at the mouth or keeps building temporary ones. What the federal hydrologists do know is that the baseline has moved, the dredges are deployed, the wedge is advancing, and the El Niño is landing in the wrong half of the basin. The river is still dropping, the barges are still grounded, the dredges are still cutting the same 8 bends, the saltwater is still creeping past Plaquemines Parish, the grain is still backing up on the dock. The El Niño is still arriving too late at the source. And 12 states are still watching their share of the largest river in North America run lower every week. The baseline has shifted. The dredges have not stopped since 2022. And the river that built America is still running below the line.